All right, what's going on, everybody? As you can see, I have typed in predictive programming into my YouTube search bar. And I want to get into that phrase a little bit in the sense that it's sort of been turned into this thing that is used to obfuscate what is really going on in the media as it relates to certain events that allegedly transpire in physical reality. And so I would encourage you to type the same thing into your search bar and see the names that come up. And from the names that come up in this search, especially on the first page, you can get an idea about how this term predictive programming is being used as a wedge that can be pivoted off of from both sides, right? The debunkers can use it, and then the conspiracy actors can use it as well. And in that process, no one explains anything about what's really going on, which is the design of all of these sorts of phrases that are used in the same way. For example, fake news or crisis actor. Those are similar phrases to predictive programming that are used in the same way to achieve the same result. But anyway, you can do that on your own and look at all the names that come up here. And it's really interesting, right, how the first one is debunking predictive programming because YouTube has altered its search algorithms. Well, I guess Google has altered the search algorithms to remove a lot of words from being effective in the search engine itself. You know, the words like hoax or anything along those lines attached to a certain event, you type that in and you don't get any videos anymore. You get only mainstream sources. So I'm a bit surprised actually that typing predictive programming in only produced one debunking predictive programming link and the rest are from the other side of the spectrum, which is not the reality of the situation as it relates to other words now. And I think I'm going to do a little experimentation and actually title this video Debunking Predictive Programming just to see if it shows up in the search engine as the second result. That probably won't happen, but I'm just going to do it as an experiment. And if I change my mind, then the video won't be titled that and you'll have clicked on something else entirely. But that's my intent as of this moment right now. So anyway, to get into a little bit about what I mean about how this term predictive programming is used, you can see the clearest example of this in the way that The Simpsons has been turned into a meme regarding its ability to quote unquote predict the future. And so you have articles like this from Time Magazine itself, one of the mainstream publications out there. Even Time Magazine is noting, hey, look, here's 15 times that The Simpsons accurately predicted the future. And they turn it into this coincidental thing, right, where they say, well, hey, it's 28 seasons of a television show and they got to create all of this content. So surely, as a result of that process, they're going to hit on certain things that they put into future scripts that will actually happen in the real world. So, hey, it's just this innocent coincidental thing. And here's 15 examples of when they actually did it right. And then you can do searches for, The Simpsons getting predictions wrong. And they'll have mainstream publications that are going over times where they actually predicted things wrong. And it's sort of this innocent thing that's put out there as far as what's really going on. But anyway, the best way to understand what I'm referring to here is to go over a specific example. And the specific example that I chose was the City of New York versus Homer Simpson. This is an episode of The Simpsons from season 9 in 1997. Now, first of all, very interesting that it was the first episode of episode 9. They could have made this any one of the various episodes of season 9, but they chose number 1. And so you have 9 and 1. And then it aired on September 21st for the first time. And so you have September again, and you have 2 and 1, or 2 towers becoming 1 in September 21st itself. Obviously, a skeptic would immediately say, oh, that's just a coincidence. Come on. But, let's go over the entire episode, and then we'll get an idea about how this is much more than predictive programming. This is subconscious manipulation. It's intentional, and it is scripted in a way that it's designed to reinforce the realness of certain events that are taking place in physical reality. And obviously, I could not actually just play the episode itself and go through it scene by scene, line by line, because the video would be copyright striked. And as a result, I had to just take screenshots. And so I'm going to bring up the screenshots and just go over them one by one. And hopefully you'll be able to go find the episode on your own and watch it if you really want to. So that being said, the first thing that happens in the episode is they're in Moe's bar, and Moe says to the 6 people in the bar, 91% of all traffic accidents are caused by you 6 guys. So you have 91%, which is 91 out of 100, which is 9/11. So from the very start of the episode, there's a 9/11 reference. Next, there is a scene with Homer, and he is being shown carried here, and you can see in his arms he has 2 bottles of Duff beer. And I hope you can see here how he is flying like a plane with 2 towers in his hands. Do you see? He's flying towards the 2 towers being held out by his hands. You see what I'm saying here? So in the first scene of the episode, the first act, we have the statistic of 91% referencing 9/11, and then we have Homer being flown around with 2 towers in his hands. And we'll get into, I guess we'll get into it right now, right? You have Homer is the name of the character, and Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. So Homer's name itself is resonating with Odyssey. And so you have Homer versus the city of New York, or you have the city of New York versus Odyssey, or you have all of the stuff that ties into 2001: A Space Odyssey and the Millennium Hilton and 9/11. Okay, you see, so it's resonating on that level too, just from the title of the episode itself. Homer, the city of New York versus Homer Simpson. Then moving on through the episode, there's a scene where Homer is recounting the first time that he went to New York. And I thought this was a really interesting image that they put in. First of all, you have Homer sort of evoking the Baphomet pose here. Just to remind you guys what that looks like. So you have the left hand in the air and the right hand down, in the same way that Baphomet is doing it with his left hand and right hand. Where I guess technically it's his right hand and left hand, but from our perspective, it's the left and the right. And when you look at the pimp's car in this scene, you have the top of it sort of looking like a plane, right? With big wings. And you could view this 2 ways, right? This could be the Baphomet wings, kind of, putting that imagery onto the top of this car. Or it could also be a plane, or it's probably both, right? A plane sort of looking that way with the wings. And then you also have, this is Mercedes logo, but obviously a Mercedes doesn't look like this with the logo in its lights. And this is kind of going back to the 9/11 2001 A Space Odyssey thing. This is also what the flux capacitor looks like if you turn it upside down. So it's kind of maybe putting that Back to the Future imagery in there as well. And then you could view this as the DeLorean with the the doors being up also. So there's a lot going on here, right? Just in this one little scene that if you were just watching the cartoon, it's Homer telling this story about how he was demoralized when he went to New York for the first time and somebody steals his wallet and a bird takes a hot dog out of his hand here. And you would just say, oh yeah, it's just a funny little joke. And then he gets chased by a pimp. But it's kind of, it's a little deeper than all of that, right? And then again, going back to Homer flying around like a plane with the two towers in his hand. And then there's the straight up version of it. Let's see, what's the next one? Oh, yeah, so the next one is the famous image, which is Lisa holding up the magazine, which says New York with the $9 next to the Twin Towers, signifying 9/11 New York, which is just beyond the realm of coincidence. But that's the famous image from the episode. And then in the next frame, you have Bart holding up this wad of money right next to New York and 9/11. And another researcher put a image together showing how the back of the money here is pretty much identical to the Masonic tracing boards and the two pillars and the arch that is shown in many of these tracing boards. And you put this back of the dollar bill onto the tracing board and you can see it's a pretty accurate match. And you put that next to other episodes of The Simpsons where money is featured and you can see the back of the money is not the same as the drawing from this particular episode where it is identical to the Masonic tracing board. So yeah, coincidence. And then there's also the whole thing about how you could take the money, the actual bills that were in circulation prior to 9/11, and you could fold them in a way that it would actually depict destruction of two towers. And so it's kind of symbolizing that as well, saying, hey, look, here's this Masonic tracing board imagery, and also, hey, here's this hint about what can be done with the money as it relates to 9/11 and New York. Now, obviously, no one had any clue that this was going on in 1997, so it's only in hindsight that you can see this stuff. Except in a situation like right now where if you were so inclined, you could go through all of the media that exists today, watch all the television series and all the movies, which bless your heart if you actually decide to do that and pollute your mind with all that stuff. But you would probably actually be able to find clues to things that are going to happen in the future that has been imprinted into the media as a way to make the events more real. So these are the famous images of the 9/11 in New York from this episode. And then the next scene in this sequence is Homer innocently drinking some crab juice. And you might say, well, yeah, this was just because the actual vendor was of this Middle Eastern, Pakistani / Indian descent, and and this is what he had to drink, this funny crab juice. And the plot thickens, of course, when you understand astronomy and the fact that Cancer is the crab constellation. And you can go to stuff like this Royal Arch tracing board, where the crab, Cancer, is the keystone in the arch, in the Royal Arch. And this goes back to the tracing boards that we were just going over, the two pillars, and how that was on the actual dollar bill that Bart held up next to the 9/11 in New York. And so you have Cancer right here, the sort of 6 and 9, the claws of the crab. As the keystone in the zodiacal signs that are on this arch, you have the sun and the moon. And then the seven stars of the Pleiades down here. And as this person says, the tracing board of the Royal Archmason, secret to the timeline of the new sun. And his whole theory here is that below the keystone, we see the seven stars that represent the Pleiades. The arch expresses the importance of the summer solstice near the Pleiades. On the left, we see the sun, while on the right, the crescent moon is depicted inside the sun. The crescent moon stands for an eclipse. However, in this case, the moon-sun eclipse stands for a conjunction. In this case, the conjunction of the sun on the summer solstice. Both suns appear over the pillars. The pillars represent the Milky Way, and the intended conjunction of the summer solstice sun is therefore the conjunction with the Milky Way. And so this guy's theory here is that this tracing board is actually showing symbolically a cosmic astronomical alignment. And all of that is sort of in play as I went into on the Sirius videos on 9/11. And again, I don't know enough about astronomy to know what was going on 9/11, but I would guess that the crab juice being sold in between the Twin Towers is relating to some star's position in relation to the Cancer constellation on 9/11, or maybe what this person was saying, how that relates to, again, as I was going over in those videos, 9/11 as a marker in time for maybe a shift in the ages, and how that's being used to co-opt some of the energy that is coming through the sun, and how the sun now looks like Sirius, and how that shift in the sun may be pointed to through little references like the Cancer constellation. And just in more broadly in general, how this tracing board is underscoring things like that. So maybe the crab was chosen for the juice to evoke this type of tracing board that is pointing towards galactic alignments of stars. And it's funny along those lines, in the very next sequence, you have the sun setting in New York in this cartoon in 1997. And obviously how they depicted the sun with this red hue is totally different from the way that the sun looks now. And it's really evident. This is one way that you can see the change in the sun, is how it was drawn in these cartoons that can't be manipulated in the same way that live footage can now be manipulated, so that you can see how people were actually perceiving the sun at the time. And you have this sun portrayed in the way that it used to look in the 90s compared to the way that it looks now. And you can even see this in newer episodes of The Simpsons where they draw the sun differently because it's perceived differently. This is also the same sequence where Homer is buying the crab juice and he drinks all of it, and you see the umbrella of the individual that sells it to him is portraying the Maltese cross. And when you actually look into the Maltese cross, which is obviously like Knights of Malta, but when you actually get into what it represents the Great Pyramid folded out. So again, you have this resonance to Egypt and the way that the pyramids were interacting celestially with the stars and Sirius especially. And so that's just kind of put in here in between the two towers. And incidentally, there was also a monument of the pyramids at the World Trade Center complex, like right below the Twin Towers. And there's all sorts of other stuff like that that's going on that I won't get into right now. But the next one is, let's see here. The next one is a little later in the episode, and but it goes to just what we were saying. So you have this random picture here of all this stuff, and you have a plane, a literal plane, flying into a building. You have a G inexplicably just sitting on top of this building. Again, going back to Freemasonry. And you have a star. I cannot make out what that is saying, but you have a star. It's probably relating to Sirius. So there you have the whole 9/11 ritual encoded into this one scene. And then the last image was just random. I just noticed that when they were doing the Betty Ford musical rendition, which is hilarious, by the way, they actually separate at one point the four beds into a swastika. And then you have the five people, which is like the five elements. And that goes back to the Homer as the Baphomet earlier, where the Baphomet is representing sort of the five elements. And this is the same exact sigil that the Order of the Eastern Star has. And obviously the Eastern Star is Sirius. So again, you have this whole resonance to Sirius and 9/11 that's coming through in this episode of The Simpsons. Homer, the city of New York versus Homer Simpson. The Odyssey, 2001 A Space Odyssey, 9/11, the Millennium Hilton, the whole thing, right? And then on top of that, the Cancer constellation, its relationship to the Milky Way galaxy and certain alignments, and maybe what that is portending as far as the yellow sun becoming the white sun, which is resonating with Sirius itself. So I think you can see how the whole thing was encoded into this episode of The Simpsons. And then on top of that, you have this little bit that I'm going to play here, which kind of is the cherry on top.
Here's a better idea. You give me your address and I'll write to you.
Okay, just send it to Jesus, Kara the Pentagon.
Just send it to Jesus, Kara the Pentagon, right? So they have the Pentagon reference in the video that's resonating. All this subconscious 9/11 programming, they slide the Pentagon in there, and then they slide Jesus in there as well, which kind of ties into all the stuff about Jesus and 9/11 and just this whole thing that I've been going over. So yeah, I just wanted to go into that real quick in the sense that obviously the city of New York versus Homer Simpson, the first episode of season 9 airs September 21st, Two Towers Become One. This is clearly by design when you put it all together. 91% of all traffic accidents are caused by you six guys. 91 out of 100, 9/11. And then you have Homer being held up, flying like a plane with two towers in his hands, flying towards the two towers, looking right at them. The most obvious, 9/11, New York. Yeah, the whole thing is just pretty crazy. And then, as I was just on, the G, the plane, a star, it's all there. And it's all under the surface. It's not directly into the plot, right? That is how subliminal subconscious programming works. And I think this is a really good example going into this whole episode of how they do this, because obviously this is the image that everyone focuses on. And it's easy to say, oh, this is just a coincidence. But when you go through the whole episode, you can clearly see that this is meticulous programming taking place. It's not synchronicity. It's not some innocent coincidence. No, the people that make this cartoon knew what was going to happen, and they put it into this cartoon as a part of it. And that gets into the whole magician's trick aspect of what may or may not have happened on 9/11.